Hey. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Hello, can you hear me?
Is your mic
Testing.
on?
Yep, my mic is on. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4,
I can't hear
5.
you.
Yeah. Hello? Testing. What can we do in that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can't hear you.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Can't hear you.
I know.
Something's not on. Let's see. Okay. We'll get started in a second. Let's see if we can get the connection issues going here. Or solved.
1, 2, 3, 4. Test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Can you try talking without your headset? Or do you have a mic built into your...
No,
You don't have a mic
I
built
don't.
into the computer.
Yeah.
Okay. You have an on-off switch on your headset?
Nope.
Okay. There's no sound.
Sure. Hello? Test. 1, 2, 3.
Want to log out and try again?
I just did.
Reboot your computer. Yeah, why don't you reboot? Okay. We'll take 5 minutes. We'll start in 5 minutes. While you do that, I'll see if I can find Catherine. Because Catherine's probably trying to find us. All right. We'll give this a few more minutes and then we'll get started regardless. Okay, it's now 10 minutes into this class. So if you're wondering when the class started, it's 10 minutes into this tape. This is September 28th, 2020. The class is music research and research and bib, music 615, and just so we can identify this because we're ways into this. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and if Christopher can join us, that's great. Send an email, Catherine, to you, seeing if you're having any connectivity issues. If you are, email me. I have my, if you're trying to get in and you can't, email me through Office, because I have the, I have my email open so I can see if there's something we can troubleshoot here. So obviously you won't know that until you watch the tape, but okay, this is our penultimate class. That means our second to last class. And we meet every Monday at 8 o'clock, 8 to 11. And next week is presentation day. So be sure that you're online right at 8 o'clock and we will have presentations. And if you, like in the case of Sammy, where I know you can't be here, if you can, that's great. Sammy said she might be able to join us. But if you can't, just make sure that you've recorded your presentation. Even, I mean, you can do it on a cell phone. Record your presentation, and might be a little stickier, but you know, any of your, make sure we have your handouts or any of the, if you're doing anything as far as YouTube or anything like that, you'll have to do that. Just record that when you record your presentation. But make sure that you have it recorded and sent to me. Probably share it through OneDrive or through Google Drive. Make sure you have it recorded and sent to me before class, actually by Sunday night, so I can make sure that it's compatible with the Monday morning class, because I'll actually run it during the class. So I'll need your recording of your presentation. All right. Christopher's coming back on, so he may have sound, he may not.
Testing 1, 2.
And
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Testing,
No
testing.
sound. Okay, that's all right. So you'll just have to, you type it to me. Now, it does say your mic is muted, Christopher. And now it says it's unmuted. Okay. Okay. All right, let's get started. So when okay. Okay, this is, let's see, a few things before we get into the book. Make sure, and you probably already finished Wingle, but if you haven't, you should finish Wingle, and it's important that you're following the information in the book. Very quick read. 7 and 8 is what we're gonna try to go through 7 and 8 today, at least through 7, chapter 7. But definitely have read all of this and make sure you're applying it. Okay. The homework, I have the homework back. Your papers are in various states. One paper is needs just minimal, if any polishing. Some of you still have to write quite a bit of your paper. I just want to make sure that you fully understand, and I know I've already given you these numbers earlier in another lecture, but I want to go over this to make sure we all understand what's required. This is a formal scholarly research paper. So it's not, as I've said before, this is not an undergraduate paper. Something that's perfectly acceptable at the undergraduate level is not acceptable at the master's level. So make sure that you're putting the time in on this that you need to, so that you can pass this class. Whole idea about of the class is that you know how to research your topic and that you can write intelligently and scholarly about it. The paper needs to be at a minimum 2,500 words. That 2,500 words does not include your title page, your footnotes, or your bibliography. And remember that we're writing this in Turabian form. That's the accepted. Different disciplines have different forms that are accepted. And for music, in the world of music, your papers will be expected to be in Turabian. So, and that means footnoted. So, no endnotes, no insight, in text citing. Everything needs to be footnoted, and it needs to be footnoted properly in Turabian form. I'm not going to teach you that because that is something you should already know at this point, certainly from having gone to Calvary and taken the other classes that are required. That should be something you already know. So if you have questions about that, make sure you get with the folks over at the CAC, at the Clark Academic Center. They're open, and with the Clark Academic Center, especially because you have a week left before you have to get the paper in. You should be able to just email it to them and probably get some online input if you need to log into Teams or to Zoom or whatever they're using over there. And talk to somebody so that you have issues with footnoting or anything like that. You can get some input. So 2,500 words. 10 to 12 pages. Of course, 2,500 words would be 10 pages. So at 250 words a page, that's double spaced, Times New Roman, 12-point type, just the normal Calvary accepted. And you can go back and read about Calvary has a you can go back to the Calvary site, click in to see what the current guidelines are at Calvary. which are basically Turabian, and you'll see how to format and how to title your paper, and make sure that you're following that. So need a title page, and then your paper to follow. So I'll hold you accountable for writing a paper that hits these requirements: 10 to 12 pages with a minimum of 2,500 words, properly formatted, properly cited. Your bibliography needs to be at least 15 works, so you have to have 15 sources. So however you need to get those sources, get the sources. These are all things, the rubric that I use for grading, I actually, before I even go in and start to grade for anything else, I look for the very basics. I'll see how many, I'll run the paper through a word counter, that's why I need it as a Windows document. Make sure you send it as a doc, and you've all done that. But I'll count the words. I won't count the title page. I won't count the bibliography, but I will count the words. I'll count the number of citations in the bibliography, but I won't count the words in the bibliography. So if it has 15 sources, you get those points. If it has a minimum 2,500 words, you get those points. So I don't take off if you have all the stuff that's supposed to be there. If you're short, if you hand in 2,000 words, you won't pass the class. Okay, so at 2,450 words, I'll dock you some points, but 2,000 words is not acceptable. So it's not close to 10 pages. So make sure you give me the correct number of words. This stuff is all mechanics. The proper formatting and proper citing shows that you've taken the time to see what's actually required. When you write a formal paper, research paper for submission to a journal, or as a book chapter, or even as a book and you're submitting it to an editor, you will be required to put that into a form. And the form is part of the process of making that submission. It's put back on you, the writer, to make sure that you're following the rules. And if you decide that you want to submit a journal article, for instance, the journal that you're submitting to will tell you the form that they want that article submitted in. They'll tell you, submit it this way. In the old days, you actually sent in a hard copy, but now you just send in a file. They'll tell you what kind of file. They'll probably tell you that it needs to be Microsoft Word version 2015 or newer. They'll specify they may even specify the font. They'll certainly tell you double space. They will tell you the minimum number of words that's acceptable for the article. And so we're treating this the same way. So it is critical that so that you get full points on this, that you get the mechanics down. Now, beyond the mechanics is a matter of style and a matter of your abilities to write. We're going to talk more about that today, as we have been in the previous class. And again, I'm holding you accountable also for the things we've talked about in class. So let's see, paper. Your presentation is going to be about 20 minutes on a 10 to 12 page paper. You're going to need a full 20 minutes. I'm not going to penalize you if you go to 30 minutes. In the past, when I've taught this course, it's not unusual for a student to approach that 30-minute mark. At 35 minutes, I'll probably give you a warning. So if you're still talking at 35 minutes, then I'll ask you to wrap it up. But the thing, as far as the research paper goes, I'm expecting that you're not just reading the paper. The best way to do this, as we talked about last time, is to have notes, and really strong notes, and use those notes to help you through what you're supposed to be talking about. It's important that you rehearse this so that you can bring it in. I know this is all stuff I've said before, but it's important that you rehearse your paper so that you can bring it in at the proper time frame, and so that you don't get hung up at some aspect of it. If you're going to use any kind of audio-visual aids, make sure those are queued up and ready to go before you start your presentation. So if you're going to use, like we're using Microsoft Teams. So if you're going to do your presentation through Teams, you're going to log on to Teams up at the top, and you need the Teams app. So there's two ways to log into Teams. You log into Teams on the cloud. That is, you can just click on the button and it'll take you into Teams. It'll say, do you want to log in on the app, or do you want to log in through the cloud? You need to log in through the app, otherwise you can't share your computer sound. Okay, so if you're logging into Teams for this presentation, make sure you open the app and log in when it says, do you want to connect with the app or with the cloud, that you connect with the app. The app then, when you go up to the three dots at the top and you click on those dots, it will give you I'm sorry, not the three dots, on the arrow. There's a computer box, the actual Teams, and I'm sorry if this is stuff that you already know, but I'm going to go over this anyway because you may not. But up at on your Teams little bar up there, little widget bar, whatever that is, there's a symbol that looks like this. Okay, it's a screen with an arrow pointing up. If you click on that, it's a share content button. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to share your screen. But before you share your screen, up in the upper, it'll be up in the upper left-hand area, right in the choices on what you want to share. It'll say share computer sound. Make sure you pick share computer sound, so what's coming through your computer then, plus your talking, will broadcast to us in a quality that we can actually make out. So I would urge you to test that to make sure it's all working before you go to do your presentation, so that you're not having technical glitches. So when I do, so far, I've had smooth sailing with my broadcasts here, but understand that I test it. If I do anything new, I test it first. I have multiple emails that I test, so that I can broadcast and make sure it's going, make sure that it's recordable. And as far as the OBS, I have, whenever I do a class, I have Teams running and recording, and I have OBS running and recording. In the case that one of the systems fail, I'm not telling you to do this, I'm just telling you this is what I do. In case one of those systems fail, I still have a usable video that I can post for online students. So that's what I do. But at the very least, you need to test stuff before you do your presentation to make sure it's working, so that we don't get hung up on technical stuff. So 20-minute plus presentation is the expectation. I would hope it would be very hard to do a presentation for a music research and bib class without having some kind of examples of music, um, some aspect of what you're talking about, because this is, ultimately this is an audible art, and you should have some audible, at least audible samples, if not some with visual elements for your presentation. But I know that's a given. Now that audible, actually, you may have a visual element and not an audible. So in the case of, I know Sammy has, it talks about community. So you may not have an audible example, but maybe you have a visual example. But that helps bring interest to the paper and to the presentation. Okay, remember, I'm going to say it again. I know I've said this over and over. This is not an undergraduate paper. This is a graduate level paper. It has to meet certain minimum standards, and I will hold you to that standard. Those of you who know me well and had other classes with me know that I'm really not an ogre. I want you to do well in this class. If you hand in a paper that I can't pass, I will hand it back to you and give you another chance to rewrite it. But understand that I prefer you to write it right the first time and get it and do the work you need to do to get it to get it into submissible form. If I've read through some of your stuff and I say you need to take that to the CAC, to the Clark Academic Center, then what I mean when I say that is submit it to the CAC for help is exactly that. If I've said you need help on this paper, submit it to the CAC. You need to submit it to the CAC. I'm not going to do it for you, but it means that the paper is not at a level that will be acceptable. So I am fully confident if you do that. I've had to do that in the past. We're not all great writers when we come in to a research and bib class, but we all need to be competent writers when we leave that class. And the reason is because the rest of your master's work is going to be papers. The day of the true false or brief descriptions or multiple choice tests are over. That doesn't happen at the master's level, or shouldn't. I know I've said this before, but the master's, I was a lot younger. I don't recall any tests that were other than essay tests. I don't recall any tests that were multiple choice or anything like that. I can tell you at the doctoral level, every single class was essays, and the essays were even in the case of theory classes, we'd be given a piece of music, and then and it was, okay, now I need 1,500 words talking about this aspect of this music, and everything was essay and writing. And so what you don't want is, you don't want to be struggling with your writing skills while you're also trying to figure out what to say about a piece of music or about a style period or something like that. So this is the class you have to be able to deliver your writing. Ooh, I'm so hard on you guys, aren't I? Especially on a Monday morning. You still awake, Christopher? Okay, good. Okay, so as far as the paper, I know I beat that up pretty thoroughly. Take your time, write well, write thoroughly. If you're a lousy writer, get help. Or if you're a competent writer and you can't make sense of the paper, you're trying to figure out how to apply some of these things to paper, get help. So we have people that can help you with that. And like I say, in previous classes when I've taught this, I've had to send people to the CAC, and they've taken pretty mundane papers and brought them back, and they're cooking. So I have total confidence that the CAC can help you if you need it. Everybody got their wiki. I have Sammy's screenshot from Sammy's submission. You can send me a screenshot of your submission, and then after you send that in, Wiki will send you a response. Yeah, I got your link, Christopher. Wiki is going to send you a response. When they send you the response, forward that response to me. That will be the indication that you've sent it in. I don't give you points based on them. Points based on the fact you've submitted it. So I need the submission. I need the response to the submission to know that that has been completed. So make sure you send me your wiki response when you receive it. Okay. Any questions on anything up to this point? Okay. All right. So we'll continue. This is Wingle Chapter 7. This is about style. Now, we've talked a lot about mechanics. We have talked some about style. And I've tried to share some of the stuff with you as we've, and some of the stuff in 7 will be review, but it's worth going over again. But I want you to be, again, the goal of the course is to turn you into a competent writer and a competent writer about music. So if you can write well about music, you can write well about anything. It doesn't necessarily go the other way. If you're a competent writer, writing about music is a very specific skill set, takes a specific skill set. And I've tried to focus on some of those things as we've gone through that in Wingle, and that's where this book is so brilliant. The writing is concise, it's interesting, it's great. I go back and reread parts of this every time I teach the course. I love this book. I wish I'd had it when I did my work, but when I took this course. But Wingle just lays it out in this very succinct, applicable way. So we're on chapter 7. This chapter is about writing style. Okay, so now we're beyond mechanics. We're beyond grammar, though we're going to talk about grammar too. We are talking about how does our paper read. When I'm reading someone's paper, when I'm reading a journal article, when I am reading a magazine article, I expect a certain sound in the words that I'm reading. So it's the same thing, and it's so important that, I mean, this affects everything. So if I have, for instance, here is the Norton Recorded Anthology of Western Music. Okay, nice CD set. And if I look at the back where it lists the works that are on the CD, those works are listed in a format that is standard. So if I look at a CD for Norton, if it's a Bach Toccata and Fugue, it's going to be listed the same way as if EMI does it, or Columbia does it, or RCA Red Seal does it, another company's professional recordings. they're all going to read with this. They're going to use the same conventions in terms of conventions in terms of word choice and capitalization. If I pick up, here's a box of, my wife was born and raised in the Southwest. And so here's a box of Pinon incense that I got her. And so the box of Pinon incense has writing on it. Okay? So it talks about, you know, what it is, who made it, where you can go to get more information, you know, where the company is, all that stuff. That's all a formal, this is somebody that wrote this, maybe not this, but the people who write those kinds of things, or the people who write, I mean, there's people who write, what other stuff do I have here? I'm sitting at my desk. Okay, here's my, no, let's see if I can pull that down. This will dump on me. Here's an SP2 universal sustain pedal for a keyboard, M-Audio, and there on the side is some writing, and it tells you the stuff that this pedal does, and then it has the blurb on the end about who they are and their registered trademarks and stuff like that. All that, there's a human being that writes that, and that human being is a technical writer, and a technical writer is writing in a very specific style. Here's Wingle. Here's the back of the Wingle book, and it's a blurb about the book, and it says this is the book. This is the 4th edition of the guide, and this is what you can expect to get from it. And there's it's got a testimonial from somebody from some university on there. All that was written by an editor, probably not even the author, but it was written by an editor whose job it is to write prose and to write it in a very specific style. So the style of writing on the back of a book, the style of writing on a box of Pinon incense, and the style of writing on a sustain pedal is all specific to product style. If you're writing a record jacket, if you're writing a research paper, if you're writing your bio, those are all specific kinds of voices that you adopt when you're writing. This research paper is a scholarly research paper. It needs to have a certain tone. Part of what you're being assessed is have you elevated your prose to a point where you're using the tone that's necessary for this type of project or this type of paper. So we'll talk more. This is all in Wingle 7, Chapter 7, and we'll talk more about this today. Okay. Writing. Here's some basic stuff about writing. Writing is a skill. There's an art to it. Some people are really gifted at it. As I said the first day of class, I'm not one of those people. I'm not a person that is a great writer naturally. I'm a person who has to work at my writing. Now, my writing, after I work at it, is pretty good. It's more than acceptable. It's fine. Okay, so my writing, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying what I've done is gone and learned the skills that I need, have the skill set I need to make sure that I'm writing properly for the academic market. Okay, so I've learned that skill set. I'm still not a great writer, but my writing is fine because of rules. I am a rule follower. So this is a skill. Writing is simply a skill. It is a skill that you must learn, and it is a skill that you must learn for this class. That ultimately is what you're being graded on. Have you learned this skill? So you need to learn how to do it. We can all improve our writing. Even after I've written a piece and I've spent some time with it, and I'm on my third rewrite, and I fixed all the issues. And I'm not talking about mechanical issues. The mechanical issues are pretty easy to fix. I'm talking about style issues. So even after I think I fixed every style issue that needs to be fixed, I still have somebody else read it. You need to have another human being read your paper. And that human being needs to be somebody who cares enough about you that they're willing to tell you that it's good or it stinks. Okay. So I'm more than happy to tell you if it's good writing or bad writing, but I'm not the person who should be reading it before you turn it into me. I'm not the person, you don't want that. I'm sorry. I'm not, it's not time to turn it in for my, don't use, let's see, how do I put this? Don't use me as the person you're sending your paper to for feedback when you're doing the final submission. So by the time you submit the paper to me for grading, and this is next week, a week from now, by the time you submit your paper to me for grading, everything should be fixed. Because at the time that you submit it to me, I'm not talking about the rough draft. Okay, the rough draft is what was due on Saturday, and I got all your rough drafts, and I've already told you what I thought of your rough drafts. And whatever I told you, know that I'm telling you that with a strong sense of love and a desire to see you do well in the class. So that is perhaps your first response, if you haven't had anybody read your rough draft, and I'm assuming some of you haven't, then that is your first response to what you've written. So you need to go from that point and then start working on how is it or what things can I improve in this paper to make Dr. Stolberg give me a good grade for the class when it's all done. So I've read your or done a cursory read of your papers at this point, and I did not grade them. I just, if you handed that paper in, I gave you your full points. That is different than what will happen when I grade your paper. When I grade your paper, it's 40% of your grade. That and the presentation are 40% of your grade, and I will grade it as the paper needs to be graded. It's a master's level scholarly research paper. So make sure that between now and then you have somebody go over it with you and tell you what needs to be fixed. Do not, you need to get it to as good a point as you can, and then have somebody give you some input. If you guys want to have each other read your papers and comment, I think that's great. If I told you to send it to the CAC, you need to send it to the CAC. And so that by the time we get that paper handed in, it might go through a number of hands, but we've turned it into a form that's the best we can have it, okay? So the time for that feedback is not after you hand it in the final time and I'm grading it for your final grade. That's too late. You need to get all that stuff beforehand. So we can all improve our writing. You need to get input from other people if you're struggling with this. Strive for professional level writing. Writing is like a performance. So if I'm going to do a recital, I actually do get out my shoe shine kit and I shine up my shoes, and I make sure my tuxedo is clean and pressed. I make sure everything fits correctly. I make sure that if my bow tie had a bow tie that wouldn't hang straight, so I got that fixed, or I got a different bow tie. I make sure that there's nothing distracting, anything that I have control over in terms of how I'm dressed, or a haircut. I mean, all that stuff. You know this stuff. If you're going to do a recital, you want to look your very best, because how you look is part of the performance. But how we treat a performance gives an indication to our audience of what we think of our audience. So if I'm going to perform something and I'm slovenly in that, and I show up and I'm unprepared, or I'm not treating it with the respect that it's due, what I say to the audience is, you don't matter enough for me to spend time on this and do a good job with it. The same thing with a paper. If you write a research paper that where it doesn't look like a lot of effort has gone into it, what you're saying is, I don't care. I just don't care. I don't care enough to put the effort in on it. Okay. Now, I'm not talking about, and I understand we all write at different levels. Yeah, you may be a lousy writer. Okay, well then show that you care by getting some input, so that you can get some help to get your writing to the level it needs to be. So look at writing at the professional level the same way you would look at a performance. All the things that you would do for a performance, okay? It shows not only respect for yourself and for your art and for your craft and an understanding of what is acceptable and what isn't, but it definitely shows what you think of your audience. So if I were an audience member, and I think you would too, if you went to a concert and the person that was singing or playing was lackadaisical and dressed like a slob, and it's a classical concert, and what's appropriate is concert dress, but they dress like a slob, they're indifferent about how they're treating, or maybe too glib, or maybe too whatever. They're not acting in a professional manner. If I were in that situation, if I were watching that concert, I would be offended, and I would hope you would be too, because it shows disdain for the audience. Our writing is the same way. Don't show disdain for your audience, even if that's not your goal. That's how it comes off. So strive for professional level of writing. There are different types of writing, as I say. Sometimes it's for a Pignon incense box, and sometimes it's for an invitation to a party, and sometimes it's a research paper. So there's different types of writing. Research papers are expository prose, and you should be striving for two things: clarity and persuasiveness. So if you're writing about, let's see, like Catherine's writing about guitar pedals. When you write about guitar pedals and you talk about how guitar pedals have impacted music, what you're saying is you believe guitar pedals have impacted music. And so what you're doing is you are using your resources as points to say, here is how guitar pedals have impacted music, and here are the proofs that I have that this has actually happened. And so when we do a research paper, and especially research paper where we're trying to pull in some different information and synthesize it into a new form, we are in fact acting like an expert. And again, as I've said before, this isn't just this shouldn't be a paper that's this is the Notre Dame Church in Paris. It was built in this year. It was built by these people. It was the people that worked there were these people. Okay, that's informative, but it reads like a dictionary or an encyclopedia entry. It should be Notre Dame Cathedral had a big impact on the development of polyphony, and here's why. Okay, so a research paper at this level is a why paper. this is how this happened, and this is why it happened. It shouldn't be just a definition, a long-winded definition. So, so you need to be writing clearly, okay? And I think all of you have a certain clarity to your writing, but it needs to be written in a way that's persuasive. Here's my thesis. This is what I'm laying out. And this is how I intend to show that this actually happened. All right. So, we talked about that a little bit, but clarity and persuasiveness. It says there's specific ways, my notes say there's specific ways to improve your writing. Read a lot of variety of types of literature. Obviously, if you read a lot, you're probably going to write really well too. I don't read nearly as much as I should, but I try to read something. I'm always trying to read something regularly. And so, as you read critically for good style. You should be reading stuff now and thinking, wow, that's really well written, or that's not so well written. I can tell you that with some of you, you're already showing, as I've seen, some of your papers are already polished enough that I can see very strong writing skills that are easily as good as the average writing skills that I would expect in anything I read. And so I want to get you all to that point. You should all be writing at something that approaches what you would expect from written material, and then write a lot. And of course, part of this class has been lots of writing. That was intentional. I wanted you to write a lot so that you could get used to allowing words to flow. But at this point, of course, with your paper due in a week, the quick and easy, or the quick down and dirty way to get the feedback you need is through the Clark Academic Center. Okay, different kinds of prose. We talked about this. Expository prose is to inform and explain. That's what this paper is. Advertising is for pushing emotional buttons. Okay, and much of what we do has some of both of that. So when we read the stuff that we read about politics, we read about education, stuff from the churches. You might be reading an article in a church journal, or maybe you got Christianity Today and you're reading an article in Christianity Today. And that's all usually a mix of expository writing and some advertising. You're trying to get a response from people, trying to push some buttons. So academic writing can be creative, and it should be. And it should be enjoyable to read. I actually enjoy reading. Every time I read Wingle, I think, well, this is really well written, and I really enjoy reading it. Just the process of reading the Wingle. I like the choices he makes, the words he uses, and very, very clear writing without being condescending. He's not a condescending writer, and he's also he doesn't treat prose as this kind of precious, pedantic kind of, it's just nice and clear. So I love that. I love to read his writing because it inspires me to write better. But you want to aim for clarity of thought and use precise words that explain your position. That's what you need to be doing with this paper. The reader is smart enough to figure out what you are intending to say and should be left to their own devices as to whether or not to agree with you. So in the case of Sammy, you're writing about building community. As you write, allow me to decide whether or not I agree with what you're writing and what your findings are. Okay, so you don't have to beat me up with it. You just tell me what it is, and then let me make my own decisions. And Catherine, you're writing about guitar pedals, and you're saying guitar pedals changed how music was made with guitars. And then you're going to offer up an argument that demonstrates how this has happened. And so all you have to do is present that in a clear and precise way, and then allow me, the reader, to agree or disagree with that. Tone. What I have here is communicate concepts, be clear, be crisp, professional, and businesslike. That means don't use casual or informal language, and don't be stilted or artificial. Stilted is when you talk in a way, is when you write in a way that you wouldn't talk. So stilted would be the sentences are all about the same length. There's no creativity in how they're presented. It's just sentence, 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 sentence. And so you might have a topic for that paragraph or a theme for that paragraph, and then you're just laying out these sentences, and there's nothing creative about it. It's just there. And so stilted, artificial language is when you use flowery language that doesn't sound like any human being talks like that. I mean, some people do, but I need to keep looking at this camera and not this camera. But most people talk in a way that's probably not too far away that how they should write. There are some folks that talk at kind of, like I say, pedantic or artsy kinds of, pretentious kinds of talk. And none of you talk that way. So, and I don't think I talk that way. Maybe I use some big words sometimes, but that's because I'm trying to look for words that best communicate what I'm trying to say. But there's also an informality that we have when we're talking to one another that we don't want to use. That's not an appropriate tone for a scholarly research paper or professional writing. So when I am teaching, I tend to shift over to a more academic style of speech. I still have an in there occasionally. Obviously, we don't put that in our writing, but I try to avoid that as much as possible. What I do try to do is say things in a way that are concise and clear and clean, because as hearers of what I'm saying, the more nebulous I am in what I say, the more likely you are to read something into it that I never intended to say in the first place. So it just happened to me this last week. I had, for another class, I did some teaching. I shared some things in the class, and I immediately got, or within a day, got an email back from a student, and the student said, "Well, it looks like you're promoting this as a device in terms of working with people in a church setting," and I was alarmed, because that's exactly not what I was trying to do, but that's what this student got out of that talk. And so I said, no, actually what I meant to convey is this, and I laid it out as succinctly as possible. And I said, I was assuming these things were already in place. And the student went, oh, okay, now I understand what you're saying. That makes more sense to me. Okay, so in spoken language, that's just one of the issues that we deal with. In writing, we get to remove a lot of that, because we get to, when I'm talking like this, I'm talking off my notes, but I have, for every 10 words on my notes, I'm doing about 150 words of talking. So in the course of talking to you during this class, I could easily say something that's misconstrued. One of the things that I know, and it happened to me as a student, but one of the things that I know the potential is there. Is when I'm talking, you're assuming that, oh, he's talking about me. So when I say, if I say, don't do this when you write, I've got 3 people out there in this class that are thinking he must be talking about me. And if I'm saying it generally, I mean it generally. But I will tell you specifically, because I care about you, if there's something you're doing and it's not the way you need to be doing it, I will tell you that you need to fix it. If I didn't, then you're wasting your money. But and I would expect that you're taking the class that you want that input. So, but if something's not clear, you need to ask for clarity. I am always trying to be clear. No matter what else goes on, I'm always trying to be clear. So, your writing, again, shouldn't be stilted. It shouldn't be artificial, but it can't be casual. Okay, and we'll talk about that. Word choices. Avoid slang. There shouldn't be any slang at all in your papers, unless you're quoting somebody. If you're quoting, John Doe, and John Doe was the preeminent whatever. If you're quoting Les Paul and you're talking about guitars, and Les Paul has some string of words that are, he's got slang in it and jargon and stuff like that, and you're quoting him, you just go with it. Okay, and that's not what I'm talking about. He may talk that way, but you can't talk that way in a paper. So quotes are about the only time you use that stuff. Okay, the stance of the writer. Okay, first of all, okay, I'll start this way. It's okay to use the word I in a research paper. In certain cases, you have to use it judiciously. Normally, don't use the word I. Your teachers probably told you a long time ago, don't use the word I. But in a research paper that's persuasive, you may use the word I for clarity. And if it's really your idea, okay. So I'm going to go back to Sammy. Sammy's paper is in great shape, and Sammy talked to a number of educators to get some of her information. So she's using real people as sources. But Sammy also is a teacher, and she has experience in this, in her subject. So it's perfectly legitimate for Sammy to talk about something that she does in the classroom that has worked for her. In that case, she might use the word I, because she is actually sharing something that she has done that reinforces an idea that she's trying to get out at that part of the paper. Now, a research paper is not a persuasive paper about your own position, okay? A research paper is about a topic that you're writing about and commenting on, or pulling in experts. So if you are a research paper, you shouldn't be the main expert in your own research paper. That, I think, is obvious. Otherwise, it's not a research paper, it's a position paper. In a research paper, you should be going for multiple sources to underscore, to prove your main thesis statement. In the course of doing that, if you have something to add that is your specific idea or your specific insight, you can use the word I. That's when you use it, and that's perfectly legitimate. Otherwise, you don't want to intrude on your paper. Okay, so The stance of the writer for this kind of paper should be not intrusive, but it should also not be, you shouldn't be invisible. So you can write in such a way that you've completely disconnected from your prose. You can write in a way that's very clinical and very dry, and you don't want to do that. You want to be engaged with your subject. And we'll talk some more about using words correctly. But you want to engage in the subject, and you want to sound like you're really interested in the subject without sounding like you're in someone's face the whole time you're talking. There are, if you have questions about that, ask me, and I'll try to be more specific. Probably be able to find you some examples. It would be the difference between, in terms of actual, if you're watching a news program and you have somebody reading the news as opposed to somebody who's doing an opinion piece. So you might have the newscaster reading the news, and then you might have another person doing an op-ed. Well, that op-ed person is in your face, and they're fully intrusive in what they're saying because it's their opinion. You want to write more like the newscaster, don't write like a newscaster, but you want to write more where you're more of an observer. You're there, you're not intrusive, but you are there in the paper. So we've talked about referring to yourself. When the idea is really yours, or when you're stating your conclusions based on your research and analysis, you can use the word I. Journals are a good source of examples. If you're reading journal articles, and you should be, I get two journals, American Choral Directors Association and the NATS journal, National Association of Teachers of Singing. And all of those journal articles, of course, are written at an acceptable level because they have to go through an editor, and the editor won't accept them if they aren't. So a proper editor is saying, okay, if I were editing, matter of fact, when I read your papers for grading, I'm reading them as though I'm editing them. I'm an editor for a journal, and I'm reading them with a journal in mind and thinking, would I be able to take this paper and say, yeah, I can publish that in a journal? Not a bad idea to subscribe to a journal. I mean, eventually should be part of a professional organization anyway, but read journal articles. A lot of the stuff's online now, and it's a great way to get a sense of where to place yourself in the writing. Writing effective sentences. Wingle says your job is to assemble the words to convey your ideas as effectively as possible. Word choices. Okay. Avoid slang. I wouldn't even say avoid it. I would say don't use it at all. Slang is not appropriate in this kind of paper. He makes the point that Anglo-Saxon roots are usually shorter, more concrete, and more forceful than Latin roots. Well, that's fine if you've had Latin, but I think you know the difference between Latin roots and Anglo-Saxon roots. But he makes the point, saying church music is better than ecclesiastical music. So Latin word is it's going to be long. It's when you use Latin rooted words, you sound like a doctor, reading a prescription bottle. So you want things to be really precise and clear, but you also want to use word choices that again aren't precious, I think is a great word for it. So my father-in-law tells me the story once. My father-in-law was assistant superintendent of the public schools, just turned 100 years old in August. But when he was assistant superintendent of the public schools, he was in a meeting, and he tells the story because he looks back on it and laughs at himself for how he said it. But he said he was sitting next to a woman in this meeting who was looking ill. It looked like she was going to throw up. And so he said, and and again, he looks back on it and pokes fun at himself for his choice of words. And he's a very proper guy. So he grabbed a waste paper basket and handed it to her, or held it for her and said, "Do you need to regurgitate into this bucket?" And his point is that he could have, all he had to do was say, "Do you need to throw up?" and hand her the bucket. But he's in this meeting and his brain was in this kind of formal fog. So he said, "Would you like to regurgitate into this bucket?" And we don't want to write that way. We want to use, if we're going to talk about throwing up, we need to say throw up instead of regurgitate. Now that's a very strong imagery, I understand that, but we need to be careful about our word choices. You shouldn't be afraid of technical words, okay? Especially if they're the right words for what you're trying to say. But whenever possible, you want to be aiming for simple, lively, crisp words. Those are words that carry a lot of meaning and they hold the attention of the reader. Flowery speech does not mean that you're intelligent, and it does not mean that you're an expert. Flowery speech often detracts from what you're trying to say. So you should avoid it like the plague. Okay? Foreign words. Okay. Pedantic. What does pedantic mean? Pedantic means fussy, finicky. It's this kind of exact perfectionist. I want to make sure that you have this meaning down to this finest detail. And well, pedantic is this overuse of words, and it just sounds fussy. So you don't want to be pedantic. Sometimes foreign words are necessary. If you're talking about leitmotif, leitmotif is the recurring theme in some 19th century Romantic music, leitmotif. So a reoccurring snippet of music that represents something. It's a kind of what came after idée fixe, which is fixed idea. Okay, so leitmotif. If you're going to talk about some recurring theme in a piece of music, if you're talking about Wagner, you're probably going to use the word leitmotif, and that's okay. That's about as strong a word as you're going to have for what that means, because there really isn't an equivalent in the English language. If I were talking about leitmotif in the English language, I need a whole sentence to describe what leitmotif actually means. But as musicians, all of us at this point in this class, if I say leitmotif, you should at least say, "Oh yeah, I remember we studied that. I don't remember all the specifics, but I do remember studying it." If I'm talking about Wagner, and I want to talk about how Wagner controlled every aspect of his music dramas. He wrote the music, he did the staging, he described how he wanted the scenery to look. He wrote the words. Wagner did everything. And the word for that is Gesamtkunstwerk, which means complete artwork. And when you're talking about Wagner, if you were writing a paper about Wagner's operas, it would be very difficult to get through that paper and not use the term Gesamtkunstwerk or Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk is as perfect a term to describe it as you could have, because there isn't really anything in the complete artwork is how it translates, but it really doesn't talk about how Wagner crafted his music dramas. Okay, So there are times when you use foreign terms. Now there's other times, like you'll hear somebody say zeitgeist. Well, the zeitgeist of that, the ideas or the beliefs, the motives of the action of the person, their zeitgeist was this. Now that's pedantic, because zeitgeist is pedantic. It's artsy and it's fussy, and so I wouldn't use zeitgeist in a sentence, and I wouldn't use zeitgeist in a paper. I don't think it's appropriate, but people do. Now that you may be going, zeitgeist, I've never even heard that word, but you just didn't know what it meant and you zoomed over it. So now when you see zeitgeist, you'll go, oh yeah, there's that word that Dr. Stolberg said we probably shouldn't use in a paper. So people use it and it just sounds pretentious. So don't be pedantic, don't be stuffy, don't be pretentious. Do be scholarly. You want to use words literally. Unique. If you use the word unique, what unique means is that there's only one in the world. Okay? Unique doesn't mean this car has unique colors for its upholstery. That's not unique. And it's a wrong use of the word. Somewhat unique is meaningless. This music is somewhat unique. That is a meaningless term because something can't be somewhat unique. It either is unique or it isn't unique. And if it's somewhat unique, it isn't unique. So don't use the term unique, right? So if being somewhat unique is like being somewhat pregnant. You either are pregnant or you're not pregnant. There's no in between pregnant. Unique, it either is unique or it isn't unique. There's no in between. So you want to be careful with words and how you use them. Don't use a word other than what it literally actually means. So I'm teaching last week, somebody's eating a cinnamon roll. Oh, where'd you get the cinnamon roll? I got it from over here because I had to use my credits because I'm not going to have time to go to lunch, so I'm using my credits to get some snacks out of the K-bar, Okay, well, how is your cinnamon roll? My cinnamon roll is awesome. No, your cinnamon roll is not awesome. Some things are awesome. God is awesome. If God is awesome, how can a cinnamon roll be awesome? Okay, so use words like hopefully, literally, awesome. Use those in their purest sense. If something is truly awesome, it means that it causes you to stop, your mouth is agape, and you're speechless. Okay, Christopher says you've clearly never had an awesome cinnamon roll. I've had great cinnamon rolls. As a matter of fact, I would love to have one right now. And I might think this is awesome or an awesome meal. But we all know that the word awesome has lost its meaning because it's become an everyday descriptor of everyday occurrences when that's not the intention of the original intention of the word. Or you'll hear somebody say, I literally had to stand there in the rain for 20 minutes. Use literally correctly. And you can probably come up with a sentence that more quickly than I can. Oh, here's one. What does flammable mean? I'll let Christopher type in the answer. What does flammable mean? Christopher, wake up. What does flammable mean? He's writing. I just need a brief definition, Christopher. I don't need a flammable means something. And you're all going, okay, well, flammable, yeah, I know what flammable means. It means, we got to get your mic fixed. Okay. Okay, an object that has the potential to be lit afire. Okay, so flammable means, flammable means that something is easily put on fire. Okay, that's flammable. What does inflammable mean? Inflammable. Okay, inflammable means the same thing as flammable. They're the same words. They mean the same thing. So don't use inflammable when you're trying to say, I got this pair of PJs for my 3-year-old. They're inflammable. They're not inflammable. The PJs cannot be set on fire. Inflammable is the wrong word. So make sure, yes, they're the same thing. So make sure that you don't assume you know what the meaning of a word is. Inflammable means the same thing as flammable. And you'll hear people talk about something being inflammable as though it cannot easily, like asbestos. Oh, it's inflammable. No, it isn't. It's non-flammable. Okay, so make sure that you're using the right words in the right way. Okay, enough of that. Creating new words. Don't create new words you can do that in speech, but you don't use it in a paper. Okay, so avoid adding IZE to the ends of words. So like prioritize, taking priority and putting IZE on the end, or finalize, taking final and putting IZE on. Don't use those words. Try to find something else, because those are just perfectly good words that have been corrupted with the addition of IZE. But we do this with other stuff. Oh yeah, here's one. I've got some examples of this. Analyzation is not an appropriate word. Analyzation, analysis. You can say analysis, but don't say analyzation. Preventative is preventive. Orientate. Have you ever heard someone use the word orientate in a sentence? It's not a real word. It's orient. It's orient. So you don't say orientate, you say orient. Okay, so oriented instead of orientated. They oriented to the left instead of orientated to the left. Okay, those are all new words. I mean, they've been around a while, but they're not real words, and they magically appeared out of the ether. And when I see them, but those are the kinds of words you need to watch for. When I see them, I just go, oh no, you can't. That's not a real word. But people still use them. I went to a church where every week the pastor would use the word orientated in a message. He found some way to plug it in there. And I finally talked to him and said, that's not really. Anyway, nouns, okay. Some more word choices. Nouns are nouns and verbs are verbs. Don't use noun, don't turn a noun into a verb, and don't turn a verb into a noun. Make sure that you have somebody that's sensitive to this reading your paper. Again, everybody in the class, you can always send your paper to the CAC for proofreading. So if you're concerned about some of these things, you think, I'm not really sensitive to some of these things. I don't even notice them when they come up on my paper. Send your paper over to the CAC and say, would somebody read through this and see if you have anything to offer? This is for a master's level class. I'm being graded on I'm being graded on grammar, content, word usage, all those things. Would one of you read through this paper and see if you can offer me any advice? they'll find this, okay, over in the CAC. So everybody send your papers to the CAC and have somebody else read them. If for no other reason than they can tell you that you write really well. Okay. Verbing. The music transitions from one section to another. That's turning a noun into a verb. Okay. Transition is a noun. Here is the transition. The transition from this section to this section is this. That's a noun. You don't transition. Okay, that's a verb. So don't turn noun into a verb. We had a chance to interface with one another, team working, on a similar project. We had a chance to interface. Interface is a noun used as a verb, okay, in that sentence. So don't do that. Just don't do it. We do it in speech, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that in speech. I'm sure I do it in speech, but don't do it in your writing. Word combinations. A nice discussion on word combinations. For music, when you write in music, there are certain things, certain words that we use to describe certain things. Key, major, minor, development. Those are all specific musical terms. And what you need to avoid is that you want to use those words, if you're going to use those words, okay? If I'm going to talk about the development section of the first movement of a symphony, first movements of symphonies are almost always in sonata form, sonata allegro form. And so it's appropriate in sonata form, in a discussion of sonata form on a particular symphony or sonata or concerto, that you would talk about the development. It is one of the sections. And development is, if you're going to talk about the development where the subject matter is developed, that's what's called the development, then you don't want to use the word developed in a sentence or a paragraph where you're using the word development. Does that make sense? So if I'm talking about key, okay, the key of this piece, okay, say I'm talking about Debussy, and this piece by Debussy has an overarching key or hovers around an area of G as far as a key. And so it might explore several keys in the course of the composition, but the key is G. I wouldn't want to say it that way in a paper. I'd want to find another word for, not for the key of the key of G. I'd want to find another word for the key, or I wanted to say primary. The primary key of this piece is G instead of the key of this piece. Now, we should do that intuitively, I think, but every once in a while I'll see somebody use, the major key of this piece is the key of G major, right? That's just like blowing my mind. And the person reading your paper is going to be completely lost because you're using the same words to describe two completely different concepts. Okay, so if you're using key, major, minor, development, and musical terms that mean this in your paper, then don't use them. If you're using them as technical terms, and sometimes that's the best terms. I mean, what else are you going to say for the key of G major? If you're going to use it as a technical term, then do not use it as a general term. Okay. Noun strings. Noun strings are when you string together loosely related nouns. So if you're reading some pretentious paper about food and you come across low nutrition density options. There are some low nutrition density options out there. That's junk food. Instead of calling it low nutrition density options, call it junk food. Junk food is much more precise. I know it doesn't add to the word count of your paper, but it does add to the readability of your paper. If I'm reading a paper and I come across low nutrition density options, I'm going to have to stop and try to figure out what it means. Junk food is simple. Okay. There's other so you'll see the patron-composer relationship, patron/composer relationship. Don't say that, say use relationship between the composer and the patron, so that we're not stringing nouns together. Redundant couplets. Okay, redundant couplets. It's combinations of adjectives and nouns where both words mean the same thing. So this is like the end result. Okay, the end result. Just say the result. Okay. Another one, general consensus. Well, general consensus is consensus. You don't need general in that. The subject matter. You don't need matter. You can just talk about the subject. The subject matter that was discussed. Actually, the subject that was discussed. It's cleaner. It's more precise. It's clearer. Let's see, what are some other ones? In-depth analysis. It's just analysis. In-depth analysis is analysis. That's all it is. And then it's another note. He goes into this. He says, avoid redundant prefixes. Interrelationship. Okay, relationship is a perfectly good word, and it means the same thing as interrelationship. So don't put the inter on there. Okay, just relationship. Now, if you have, I've started using Grammarly, and it is somewhat annoying because it looks at everything. But oh my, it has done a great job of eliminating excess words in my writing, just in my emails. And I would, and it's free. So if you haven't already, download Grammarly. I'm not getting paid to make this suggestion. I picked it up from Teddy Bittner, Dr. Bittner, who said, man, he goes, I'm using Grammarly. It sure has helped my writing. And Dr. Bittner is a superb writer. Okay, so, Grammarly has done the same for me. So, as a matter of fact, it's running all the time. It's an app that's running all the time. So, even my notes here, it'll say, hey, take a look at this. I think as a matter of fact, my examples, it has them underlined saying this is not a good choice of words. So Grammarly helps a lot. It goes way beyond grammar checker and spell checker in Microsoft Word. Add Grammarly, download the app. I think you'll be happy you did it. Stock couplets. Combinations of adjectives and nouns that always seem to appear together as a stock couplet. Abject poverty, utter despair, reckless abandon, extenuating circumstances. We see that all the time. I think you do. Certainly utter despair and reckless abandon. Just don't use those. It's not good writing. It's certainly not good grammar. The not unconstruction is another thing to avoid. It was not uncommon at this time. What does that mean? It was not uncommon. Well, it's common. It was common at this time. Just say common. Don't say not uncommon. Just say it was common at this time in the Renaissance. So he makes the point that not uncommon becomes not unannoying when you do not, not unconstructions. Dependence on modifiers. Okay, I'm guilty of this. And again, we talked a little bit about this. Many of our words have lost their original potent meanings. Many of our words do not mean what they used to mean. They were perfectly fine words. Awesome, unique, brilliant, superstar, artist, student athlete. Okay, student athlete. I hear student athlete and I think, well, is there also student musicians and student actors? I mean, what is a student athlete? So, but but what is a superstar? I remember as a little kid watching Barbra Streisand, first Barbra Streisand special on TV, which was in the 60s. And Color Me Barbara. I even remember, I think you can watch it on YouTube now. I even remember the name of the show, Color Me Barbara. I was a little bitty kid, 6 or 7 years old. And my dad said, she's a superstar. And I said, what is a superstar? And he described what a superstar was. And but now that has no meaning. It did back then, but it doesn't now. Artist. We have applied artist to every possible music, every possible acting. Not everybody is an artist. Not everybody who performs music is an artist. Not everybody who writes music is an artist. There are people who sing. There are people who sing professionally that I would argue probably are not artists. So they were great words at one time, and now they've lost their meaning. So dependence on modifiers. Use strong nouns. Strong nouns and strong verbs instead of modifiers. Okay. So brilliant is a great word. And you'd want to say brilliant instead of he was really smart or he was very smart. Just use the word brilliant. It's a better choice. So the fact that a word has lost a lot of its potent original meaning doesn't mean that you can't still use it. Just make sure that you use it correctly. So if we had open mics, this is where I would ask you to give me colorful synonyms for the word walk, W-A-L-K. But I'll let you use your, come up with some rich terms for that in your own mind. The word walk. Okay, now we're shifting to, we talked about words, now we're shifting to sentence structure. And let's see, we're going to take a break. Okay, so it's 9:40, it's 9:39, so 40:55. We'll come back and get started at 9:55. I will see you shortly. 9:55. Yes. Okay. 9:55. Okay, now that you're all sufficiently paranoid about your writing, now we can go into sentence structure, and this is this is something I struggled with when I first started writing. This is when I was doing the doctorate, and I think it was coming out of the investment industry where passive voice is not unusual. There's some disciplines where, like scientific disciplines, where passive voice is the voice you're supposed to use for writing. So passive voice versus active voice. It's not always wrong in a scholarly paper. It is usually wrong, okay? So you want to try to use active voice whenever possible. There's a great in chapter 7, there's some great stuff here on active versus passive voice. We've already talked about it. I want to go over it a little bit more and make sure that you're avoiding, for some folks, it's just, you just don't have any trouble with it. But for many of us, probably most of us, me included, passive voice is my default voice. So passive voice sentences often use more words than active voice sentences usually do. They can be vague and they end up with this kind of tangle of words that come out. So active voice versus passive voice. In a sentence written in active voice, this is the baseline here. In a sentence written in active voice, the subject of the sentence performs the action. In a sentence written in passive voice, the subject receives the action. So active voice would be the candidate believes that Congress must place a ceiling on the budget. Passive would be it is believed by the candidate that a ceiling must be placed on the budget by Congress. Active voice, researchers earlier showed that high stress can cause heart attacks. Passive voice, it was earlier demonstrated that heart attacks can be caused by high stress. And this is probably as clean a version of this as subject performs the action versus the subject receives the action. Subject performs the action. The dog bit the man. Subject receives the action. The man was bitten by the dog. Okay, so and that's passive. So you want to avoid passive. Usually, look for by. If you see by in the sentence, by, you're probably in passive voice. If you're, go to find the find function in your Word document, the Word document editor up in your toolbar up at the top. You can go to the find function, type in the word by, and look wherever you have the word by. Look for passive voice because that's a biggie. If the subject of the sentence is somewhat anonymous, see if you can use a general term such as researchers or the study or experts in this field. Okay. So find your passive sentences and then convert them to active sentences. That's all you have to do. The time that you might use passive voice is when you want to emphasize the action over the person doing the action. So, for instance, after long debate, the proposal was endorsed by the Long Range Planning Committee. Well, the fact that it was endorsed is is what you're trying to emphasize. It was finally endorsed. Okay, finally they endorsed this. Okay, well, in that case, you'd use passive. The symphony was modified several times by Beethoven. And so you want to talk about there, you want to highlight the fact that it was modified. The Eroica Symphony was modified by Beethoven 17 times. So that might be a place where you'd use it. Let's see, to keep the subject and focus consistent throughout a passage. So the data processing department recently presented what proved to be a controversial proposal to expand its staff. After a long debate, the proposal was endorsed by. So in this case, you're trying to keep the flow of the controversial proposal going, and passive voice would be appropriate. To be tactful by not naming the actor. That would be another place for passive voice. So the procedures were somehow misinterpreted. So if you want to say, you don't want to say Joe screwed up, or Jack wrote a poor paper. You could say the paper was poorly written. Okay. And you could use passive voices. Mistakes were made. The procedures were somehow misinterpreted. So you can take the subject out and, or the actor out, the person doing the stuff, and make a passive sentence. And that might be what that might be cases you'd want to do it. But usually it's usually to avoid pointing fingers at somebody. Or you might use passive voice to create an authoritative tone. Visitors are not allowed after 9 p.m. Yeah. Okay, so normally use active voice with clear subject, verb, and object. Okay, enough of that. You can go back and reread passive and active. Every time I write a paper, I always go back and refresh my understanding of passive and active sentences. So, word order. English grammar is dependent on word order rather than inflection to indicate the case of nouns. Changing word order can dramatically affect the meaning you are conveying. Okay, and this is page 129 of your book. And I'll read it right out of here, but this is worth looking at. Okay, so this is bottom 129, it's talking about Stravinsky. So it can be changing word order because of the way English works. Changing word order can have subtle effects and sometimes devastating effects on the meaning of a sentence. So here's the same sentence with different word orders. Number one, after the large-scale works of his early period, Stravinsky turned to a new idiom, the neoclassical style, which represents his chief contribution to 20th century music. Number two, after the large-scale works of his early period, which represent his chief contribution to 20th century music, Stravinsky turned to a new idiom, the neoclassical style. Okay, well, that completely changed the meaning of the sentence. Number three, Stravinsky turned to a new idiom, the neoclassical style, which represents his chief contribution to 20th century music after the large-scale works of his early period. That's also different. Number four, after the large-scale works of his early period, Stravinsky turned to a new idiom, his chief contribution to 20th century style, neoclassicism. Okay, so the same words reordered 4 different ways, and it has 4 different meanings. So you know this, word order matters, but make sure that you're reading to make sure that the order you have your words in is actually the meaning that you want to give those words. Parallel constructions. When you want to emphasize the relationship between parallel elements or ideas, or contrast between them, keep the sentence structure parallel. Okay, that means make sure all the elements match up grammatically. In page 130, so here's a comparison. It says Bach, a church musician, composed cantatas and passions. Handel, on the other hand, did not specialize in those genres, but rather in opera and oratorio. The explanation for this difference is that Handel worked for the English court rather than the church. Versus Bach, a church musician, composed cantatas and passions. Handel, a court musician, composed operas and oratorios. So parallel construction. It just keeps things cleaner and neater. Yeah, so enough of that. So go back and read. I don't think you guys really have a problem with that, but go back and read through some of that if you do. Variety of sentence structure. Okay, now I do see some of this going on. Simple subject, verb, object sentences, and as the book says, are choppy and amateurish. It's choppy, it's stilted. Invariable patterns become tiresome. And this is worth, I am noticing some of this, so this is worth talking about. Okay, this would be this kind of choppy. William Byrd was born in Lincolnshire in 1543. He studied with Thomas Tallis. He was appointed organist of Lincoln Cathedral in 1568. He was elected a member of the Chapel Royal in 1517. That's choppy, and it's I mean, it shows that there's no creativity at all in that, and that the invariable pattern of basically it's subject, verb, object, and it's the same thing over and over again, becomes very tiresome, and it's very amateurish. So you take that same information and you write it creatively. William Byrd was born probably in Lincolnshire, although the documentary proof of this fact is less than definitive in 1543. It is commonly assumed, in the absence of incontrovertible proof, that he studied music with Thomas Tallis, another organist, gentleman of the Chapel Royal under several English monarchs. And Coleholder, that's becoming, actually I would probably cut that down because that's too much stuff. That, of course, did not occur until much later, after Byrd had begun his career as an organist and had been himself elected to the post of gentleman. Okay, let's just run on sentences. So we wouldn't want either one of those. Here's what we want. Byrd studied, let's see. So here's two sentences. Byrd studied music with Thomas Tallis. Then he was appointed organist of Lincoln Cathedral, and shortly thereafter he was elected a gentleman of the Chapel Royal. That's kind of boring. It makes everything sound equal. After he studied music with Thomas Tallis and served as organist of Lincoln Cathedral, Byrd was elected a gentleman of the Chapel Royal in 1517. There's the sentence you want. So don't write in a choppy, vary your sentences, but don't just do these run-on sentences. Your sentences should convey the information that you're trying to convey without being stilted and without being overly wordy. You wouldn't want that. Okay, so Complex sentences divide statements into main ideas and subordinate or secondary clauses. Since complex sentences single out one action as a main idea, they are generally clearer and stronger than compound sentences. Complex sentences, as opposed to compound sentences, which treat all ideas as equal in importance. A compound sentence is two sentences, two standalone sentences that you put together with like the word and or maybe but. But complex sentences are sentences that are referring back to themselves within the sentence. And and generally you can still emphasize certain parts of the sentence without making everything sound like it's the same. So when I say don't just do the same short, choppy sentences over and over again, the easy fix, which is not a fix, is to just join them with the word and. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying rewrite the sentences so that you have these complex, rich sentences. Again, Clark Academic Center can help with that if you need that. Effective paragraphs. Okay. A paragraph is a unified exposition or explanation of a single idea. A paragraph, you should be able to look at a paragraph and see that there is what is the main point of this paragraph? There shouldn't be three main points to a paragraph. You shouldn't start a paragraph with one idea and end up in a completely different place by the end of the paragraph. You shouldn't have two or three unique, distinct ideas that are each being treated within the same paragraph. A paragraph should have a single idea. There should be a topic sentence. That's why when we did the outlines, I said you could actually take your first sentence for each paragraph, your topic sentence for each paragraph, and use that as your outline. But then you write the paragraph versus that topic sentence. So you have the topic sentence clearly states the single idea the paragraph will develop, and then the rest of the paragraph must closely be related to that idea. Not somewhat related, but close. It must be talking about that. So if you're talking about the moment in Debussy that frisson occurs, then the rest of the paragraph needs to be talking about that specific moment in the Debussy or something related to that moment in the Debussy. That's a paragraph. Otherwise, just grouping a bunch of sentences together don't make it a paragraph. When you're editing and you're reading, make sure that your paragraphs are true paragraphs. That's one of the things you want to check. The effective essay. Paragraphs should be ordered and connected in a way to move the argument along logically. The entire essay must have a thesis expressed in the main topic sentence. The introduction, for the introduction, the essay should have an introduction that leads into the topic, states the main thesis of the essay, and outlines how the essay will proceed. That's what you want in your introduction. Transitions. Keep the logical chain of argumentation clear at all times. And then you have a conclusion. An essay must be summarized in a concluding section where you talk about what you wanted to show in the paper and how you showed that, and you have shown, and so this is here's the punchline to the paper, basically. The conclusion should be written in the same tone and style as the rest of the paper. I think that's obvious, but it's worth saying. Summary. Each level of writing needs your expert attention. The word choices, the sentence structure, paragraph structure, and the essay as a whole. You need to carefully plan, draft, and edit your paper. And I have here, this goes for everyone, have the Learning Center read it through for you to see, so you get another set of eyes. And you want somebody to read if you're going to hand your paper to your friend for reading, then your friend better be really a really fine writer, because having your friend who's not a good writer read your paper is not going to do you any good. Make sure the person understands writing. That's why I say the CAC is a perfect place to send stuff, because they have a bunch of writers up there, and they're really good. I really like the work they do. Oh, have a colleague read it through for you. I would send it to the CAC and have a colleague read it. Edit fearlessly and mercilessly. You need to approach this. Don't let things slide in your paper. Edit fearlessly and mercilessly. Rewrite sections of the paper if they need to be rewritten. Don't be afraid to rewrite a sentence or to restructure a paragraph. Word processors make it easy. And you don't have to be a grammar Nazi, but somebody does. If you are not a grammar Nazi, then you need to find a grammar Nazi. If you aren't great at this stuff, you need to find someone who is, and have them give you the input you need to do an acceptable paper. Okay. Okay. Some other, we touched on some of the stuff in chapter 5. I want to go over it a little more in depth, because this is a good time to do it. Stylistic periods. You capitalize a stylistic period when you're using it as a technical term. So if you say Baroque era or classical period, Baroque era, the B is capitalized, the E is not. Classical period, the C is capitalized, the P on period is not. Do not capitalize when used in a general sense. Okay, so if I'm saying the lyrical romanticism of a Mozart aria or classical music, then romanticism and classical are not capitalized. Western music would be capitalized. Okay, Christopher said, should Western music be capitalized? Yeah. Terms that represent styles instead of specific periods of history are not capitalized. Neoclassicism is not capitalized. Impressionism is not capitalized. That's talking about styles and not periods, not specific periods. And I know I said this before, I'm going to say it again. If I talk about a fall semester, if I say this fall, if I say to someone, this fall, I am teaching, or later this fall, I'm teaching choral literature, because I am. Okay, so later this fall, I'm teaching choral literature. That's a small f on fall. If on the other hand, I say, I will be teaching choral literature fall of 2020. Now fall becomes a specific semester. In that case, fall is capitalized. So fall of 2020, fall 2020 is capitalized. This fall isn't. Okay. So one is a specific title, and one is a general term for time. So does that make sense? So if I talk about the fall, I'm talking about essentially anything that happens between summer and winter. Okay, the fall. But if I talk about fall 2020, I'm talking about specific dates, and it's a specific time pursuant to Calvary's schedule. Referring to centuries, always spell out the centuries, okay? So when you're talking about, now I don't do this in email, I do it when I write. So if you're talking about the 18th century, you spell out 18th. You don't put 1-8th, okay? So 18th century, spell the whole thing out. For centuries, you don't use a hyphen when it's a noun. You do use a hyphen when it's an adjective. So 18th century is a noun. 18th century 18th century opera would be used as an adjective. Okay, so you use a hyphen when it's an adjective. Here's an example. Brahms died near the close of the 19th century. That's a noun, no hyphen. The late 19th century orchestra provided a rich palette of evocative colors. That's an adjective. And you do hyphenate it. And then musical works, we know we italicize. We talked about that. We'll talk more about that. Capitalization conventions. I know this is just tedious stuff, but it's good stuff. And you want to make sure this is all the mechanics that you're applying to your paper. And we're looking at it, we're reading it, it's in your book, you've already read it, I know, but I'm expecting you to have this as part of your paper. That's part of the reason we go through this class. Okay, capitalization conventions, tonalities. You use lowercase for tonalities. So if you say modes, pentatonic, major, minor, that's all lowercase unless it's part of a title. So if I have Mozart modulates to C major, the M in major is small case. Mozart modulates to C major, because we're talking about key, in his sonata in C minor. There, minor is capitalized because it's a title. Okay. Genre names, except when they refer to specific titles, are small case. So sonata, symphony, string quartet, chanson, suite are all lowercase, unless it's symphony number 5 in E minor. Then the S is capitalized on symphony. Okay. When it's a title, it's capitalized. Musical forms and sections of forms are not capitalized. So if we talk about sonata form or binary form, concerto form, motet, arias, exposition, development, and recapitulation, all of those are lowercase. Liturgical words, when they begin a movement or section, are capitalized. So if I say Kyrie or the Gloria, that would be, if I'm talking about the Mass, okay, I would capitalize those. Dynamics. Endings and other musical instructions use lowercase and italics. Okay, so complete words are preferable to abbreviations, but when shortened, italics are still required. So let's see. So like forte, pianissimo, a cappella, da capo would all be italicized. Tempo markings are capitalized only when they refer to the beginning of a movement. So if the movement's marked adagio, the A in adagio is not capitalized. But when you're referring to the beginning of a movement, the adagio movement, it's capitalized. Pitches, chords, and time signatures. Okay, in written text, pitches are capitalized and chords are given in Roman numerals, or their use, whichever is more logical. So, happy birthday, it begins on C. C is capitalized and on the tonic chord, but moves to a 5/7. The V would be a capital V and then the number 7. 449832. You put / let's see, what is that? / is that a / backslash? /4 9/8, but you don't stack them, like a fraction. But you know that. Musical periods are generally capitalized. Middle Ages is capitalized. Renaissance, capitalized. Baroque, Baroque period, Baroque B is capitalized. Romantic composers would be capitalized. Romantic composers. Romanticism wouldn't be capitalized. Middle Ages is capitalized. Medieval music is not capitalized. Medieval would not be capitalized because it's not a noun. It's not referring to a specific title. It's referring to it's describing the music. 20th century music, contemporary music centuries. Let's see, contemporary music. 20th century music, okay. When you're talking about 20th century music, that's hyphenated, all lowercase. 19th century leader, 19th century is hyphenated and lowercase because they're two adjectives. 16th century motets, same thing. 16th century motets, 16th century is hyphenated. In the 17th century there, or 16th century is not hyphenated. Okay, so if I say 16th century motets, 16th century is an adjective, that's hyphenated. If I say in the 16th century, that's not capitalized and it's not hyphenated. Instrument and voice names, lower cases, let's see. Violas, timpani, flutes, French or English horns, meaning not a literal meaning of the, I mean, if you're talking about the nationality, they're capitalized. French and English are capitalized. But when you say French horn or English horn, that's referring to the instrument, they're not capitalized. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass is not capitalized. Spell out notes, keys, and chords. Avoid using abbreviations and symbols for music elements. So middle C, you write out middle, M-I-D-D-L-E, small m, and then C, be capital C. The key of E, capital E. If it's if you need to specify that it's G natural, it's capital G hyphen natural. A flat is capital A hyphen small f flat, right? F sharp would be capital F hyphen, then a small s sharp. F sharp minor, F is capitalized, the F sharp is hyphenated, and sharp and minor are both lowercase. If I'm spelling out a triad, I would put D, capital D hyphen. Let's say I'm doing D, F, F sharp A. So I'm doing a, let's say I'm in the key of D, and I'm doing the one chord in the key of D. So D, F sharp A. Capital D hyphen, F, capital F hyphen, sharp, all small case, hyphen, capital A. That's how it's spelled the chord. Italics for foreign languages. Italicize all foreign words unless they are particularly familiar in English usage. If it is an Italian word, italicize it. Unless it's an Italian word that has become an English word. So if I say symphony, or if I say cello, or if I say tempo, those are all English, perfectly fine English words that are actually Italian in origin. On the other hand, if I say, he would say opera comique is not italicized, but I might argue that. Crescendos is an American form of crescendi. So crescendos would be the American plural, wouldn't be italicized. Crescendi is the Italian plural form. That I'd probably italicize. But typically, don't italicize foreign terms unless they're idée fixe. Idée fixe I would italicize. Leitmotif I would italicize. Titles of musical compositions. The titles of operas, oratorios, motets, tone poems, and other long musical compositions are italicized. So if I have Orfeo, the Magic Flute, Die Zauberflöte, Messiah, those are all italicized. Titles of songs and other short compositions are given in quotation marks. Jesu, joy of man's desiring, in quotes instead of italicized. If I were doing Gretchen am Spinnrad, the Schubert art song, that would be quotation marks. Titles consisting of generic terms are capitalized, but not italicized or put in quotation marks. So, titles consisting of generic terms are capitalized, but not italicized or put in quotation marks. So if you're talking about Brahms' Ballade Opus 118, that's capitalized, but it's not italicized. Schubert's Piano Sonata in B flat major, Chopin's Waltz in C sharp minor. Movement titles are, check the book for that, because this stuff gets to, we're getting in the nitty gritty now. Movement titles are generally capitalized. Individual movements from larger works take quotation marks. So the Andante from Mozart's Symphony in G minor, the Kyrie from Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, On a Rainy Night from Beckwith's lyrics of the Tang Dynasty. The Andante would be quotes. The Kyrie would be in quotes because they're smaller sections of the larger work. Titles assigned by composers should be italicized. Okay, so if the composer said this is the title, then that should be italicized. Nicknames or common names appear in quotation marks. So Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, Emperor is in quotation marks. So if the composer named it something, that's italicized. But if everybody else names it something, like the heroic, Beethoven's Eroica, Symphony No. 3, the Eroica would be italicized. Names of individual movements from larger compositions, including choral works like Handel's Messiah, are referred to by title and given quotation marks. So if you're talking about Handel's Messiah and He Shall Purify, that's in quotation marks. Messiah, of course, is italicized. If you're talking about Wohin from Die Schöne Müllerin, so Schubert's Die Schöne Müllerin. Die Schöne Müllerin is the major work, whatever 24 songs or whatever is in that. Die Schöne Müllerin is italicized. Wohin, which is one song or one piece of lieder from that work, would be quoted. Okay, enough of that. I think we talked about that. An expert is someone with 10,000 hours of study in an area. So you're rapidly becoming experts. Okay. Chapter 8, writing problems. Let's see. Let's get started on this because we'll only be able to do part of this next week. Okay, so here's chapter 8. We're in the last chapter of the book. So we've talked about words and sentence structure and paragraphs, writing for clarity and persuasion. Now, common errors, just I'll point these out, apply them if they need to be applied in your paper. Incomplete sentences. An incomplete sentence needs at least a subject and a predicate. A predicate is part of the sentence or clause containing a verb and stating something about the subject. So it would be like went home and John went home. So John went home is a complete sentence. So make sure you don't have incomplete sentences. Make sure your sentences are complete. Run-on sentences, page 137 has an example of a run-on sentence. They're painful to read, so you know what they are. Avoid them if you don't. Page 137 in the book. Subject and verb need to agree. Okay, so if you're writing, your subject and verb need to support each other. So first of all, they must agree in number. Okay, and so if you have says collective nouns take singular verbs when thought of as a unit or set acting together. So the girls made sandwiches for lunch. Okay. In this case, this is when you have a singular verb that's thought of as a unit. Okay, so the committee recommends. The committee is treated as a single unit. If I'm writing about a choir, I don't write about a choir in terms of being many people. I write about a choir as being a self-contained unit. Okay. When the group is thought of as a collection of individuals acting separately, the collective noun takes the plural verb. The difference being whether you could put it or they. It's an easy fix to use a plural noun, orchestra players, and members of the committee. So orchestra would be a single entity, but if you put orchestra players, you're now doing multiple people, and you'd have to change the verb to agree. Agreement on pronoun and antecedent. The word or words that a pronoun refers to. So pronouns and antecedents must agree in number. See examples on 139. Pay special attention to masculine versus gender neutral pronouns. There's always, if there is a grammar rule that you're having trouble working around, rewrite the sentence. There is always another way to rewrite, to write a sentence. You can always rewrite a sentence. And just figure out another way to say what you're trying to say. So if you write yourself into a corner, back out, rewrite it, and say it in a different way. Okay. Proper cases of pronouns. What do I want to say about that? Okay, we often do this, and we generally do this by instinct, and usually we're wrong. At least often we're wrong, but let's look at this. Proper cases of pronouns. This is on page 140 of your book. And we'll compare nominative, possessive, and objective. So you need to choose the correct form based on the grammatical function of the pronoun in its context. So nominative would be I, possessive would be my, and objective would be me. Nominative is he, possessive is his, and objective is him. So it says one frequently hears incorrect cases in compound phrases like the following. My parents frequently took my brother and I to concerts and plays. Now that should be, of course, me. My parents frequently took my brother and me to concerts and plays. Okay, because me is the objective form, and my brother and me. Or if you left out my brother, my parents frequently took me to concerts and plays. Okay, so that would help you clarify that. The conductor offered George and I an opportunity to join the trombone section for the next concert. That should be me. The conductor offered George and me an opportunity to join. Look, in conversation, this happens all the time. I even catch myself. I'll say something. I might say, yeah, my wife and I had a chance to go to, and then I'll stop and I go, I'm sorry, my wife and me had a chance to go to, and I'll stop myself in speech. You probably heard me do it because I'm self-correcting as I'm talking. We don't have to do that with papers because we're rereading our papers. And whenever you're referring to yourself, you should be thinking, okay, do I have the proper case, the proper pronoun case? Because that's where you're going to end up. It'd be like on words like I, he, she, they, who, or whoever. But especially the word I. So make sure you're using I and me correctly. That sounds like grammar school, doesn't it? But we still fight it. And it's because so many people fight it and we hear it that the brain picks it up as being normal or being correct. Relative pronouns. They introduce adjectival clauses and some kinds of noun clauses. Who, which, that, what, and whoever. Okay, let's see. Use that. Okay, here we go. That and which. The use of that and the use of which. Use that in restrictive clauses. Those that make a general subject more restrictive. And use which for non-restrictive clauses. Clauses that add info about the antecedent rather than making a general antecedent more restrictive. So on page 141, Otello, which was one of Verdi's last operas, is written in a style considerably different from that of his early operas. So that's proper use of that and which. The opera that made Verdi a success was Nabucco. So the clause is restrictive and limits the specifics opera as a general noun. So that is correctly used. So that in restrictive clauses, which for non-restrictive clauses. Misplaced modifiers. Yeah, we should look at that. 143 and 144. Okay. Misplaced modifiers, single words. He says, I recently read the quote, we are trying to turn this mess we find ourselves in around. The operative phrase is turn around, but the modifier around is placed too far from turn. The word it modifies. Turn this mess around would work because the modifier is still fairly close to the word it modifies. But in this example, it's too far away. So when you're using modifiers that belong with this phrase, but you put them way too far over here, maybe earlier in the sentence. And then it gives examples. Only I attended the rehearsal Saturday, or the rehearsal yesterday. Means that no one else did. But if I say I only attended the rehearsal yesterday, it means I only went to it. I didn't do anything else with it. I attended only the rehearsal yesterday. That means I didn't go to something else. I attended the rehearsal only yesterday. It means that I just did it recently. So where you put that modifier, of course, makes a big difference. And then he talks about phrases too. All right. So I don't want to get bogged down on that. I'll let you read that. That's on page 145. Oh, split infinitives. Page 145. Let's see. I'm going to let you read that. I can read it to you, or you can read it. I'm going to let you read it. Split infinitives and mixed metaphors. Page 145 and 146. Check that out. Yeah, mixed metaphors. Similes and metaphors are fine. For your writing, just use them correctly. Of course, a simile has like or as in it. A metaphor doesn't. And I'll let you, I won't beat that up too much. You can check that out. Spelling issues. Uh, 147. Okay, on page 147, this is worth doing on your own. But on 147, he gives a list of words and asks, circle the words that are spelled incorrectly. So go back and take a look at that and see which words you can spell that you can tell are spelled incorrectly by just looking at them. His point of this chapter, I think, is that there's a bunch of English words that are often misspelled. The problem is English is an amalgamation of multiple sources. Our words come from multiple sources. I was taught as a student, I will share this, as a student in grade school, and I was quite surprised, and I just found this out in the last few years, the last 4 or 5 years. It's actually a master's class. Okay, the word dilemma. Okay, and if I say spell the word dilemma, you would say, well, dilemma is spelled D-I-L-E-M-M-A. And I was taught that it's spelled this way. Now, that's not my mom teaching me that in homeschooling. That's what I was taught in the public schools, dilemma. And it is, the thinking was that it was spelled the same way, or it was the same issue with this word. Column. Column is spelled M-N, and the N is silent. So I was taught that the word was dilemma, but pronounced dilemma. The N is silent. And the reason I found this out was because I was writing an email, and in it I referred to a dilemma that I had, and I put D-I-L-E-M-N-A. And spell checker wouldn't let me use that word. Spell checker said, no, it's M-M-A. And I thought, okay, well, this is one of those this is one of those English words like gray, G-R-A-Y or G-R-E-Y. One is an English version and one is an American version, and they're both used in America. Okay, that's what I figured. And then I started to do some research on it, and I could not find any dictionary that had D-I-L-E-M-N-A. And come to find out, horror of horrors, M-N-A for dilemma is not true. No dictionaries, no formal dictionaries have that as a proper spelling. So I started to dig into it. It was like living in a Twilight Zone episode, waking up and finding out that it's like Planet of the Apes. The apes have evolved and now run the world, and mankind is in cages. And so, parallel universe. I did some research and finally found other people. There's a whole group of people who were taught that dilemma is spelled D-I-L-E-M-N-A. There's a whole bunch of us, and it seems to be concentrated in the Midwest, specifically in the upper half of Illinois, a few parts of Missouri, and I even found some folks in Kansas, in the state. But that's the people who are spelling it that way, which means that somewhere along the way, somebody in probably some education course was told this is the way to spell it, and it has since continued to reverberate through time. So I can tell you dilemma is actually spelled D-I-L-E-M-M-A, and that D-I-L-E-M-N-A is not an alternate spelling. It is just wrong. Okay. Now I found that out as an adult within the last 5 or 6 years. Okay. So I still find things out like this. So all of this, the whole teaching point is when you write, keep a dictionary with you. Now I check it on the internet, right? I just Google it. But even up to 5 or 6 years ago, when I would write, I would keep my Webster's dictionary right next to the computer so that I could quickly look up any words that I had a question about. Don't misspell words. Spell checker does amazing things. Do understand that spell checker is not always right, just like grammar checker in Word is not always right. But do use them because 95% of the time it'll fix the problem. And the corollary for that, if you're doing a presentation, and you're going to use a word, there's 2 things you should not make a mistake on in a presentation: how to properly use that word and how to properly pronounce that word. Okay. So you will hear people talk about their fortes, F-O-R-T-E. They're probably not musicians, but the word forte, meaning strength, is throughout the English language, but people mispronounce it. You'll hear people mispronounce drinkable water as potable. It's not potable, it's potable. Water that is drinkable, P-O-T-A-B-L-E, is potable. It is not potable. Potable is a mispronunciation. It's not an alternate pronunciation. It is a wrong pronunciation. So when you see potable, or if you hear somebody say potable and they mean potable, that's actually wrong. It's like misspelling dilemma. So in your presentations, if you have a word that's questionable, now it's easy. You go online, you click a few buttons, and it'll actually tell you how to pronounce it. Just put in pronounce potable. Pronounce and put the word in, and it'll tell you what it is. Sammy's online. Cool.
Maybe.
Hi, Sammy.
Hey, I just wanted to hop on and say hi. I had some time.
Hi, are you there, Sammy?
Yes. Hold on. I don't know how to do this.
Sammy, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
No, no, no.
I'm assuming Sammy's there.
Wait,
But I
no.
can,
I don't. Oh, wait.
see, I'm getting a blink on that.
Can you hear me at least? I don't know what's going on.
Or wait. Can you hear him? Or was it he who
Sammy, can
couldn't
you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. She's in. All right, good. Glad to have you with us. We are just about to finish up here. So so we're talking about spelling. Definitely definitely good. Thanks for joining us. Let's see. Actually, that's probably, yeah, we're at 54 minutes. Okay, we'll start there. We'll start there next week if we get to it. Okay, so any questions about anything? Now that I have both of you, and I'm not sure where Catherine is, but next week is presentations, and we'll finish out the rest of chapter 8 if we have time. So great, excellent. Would love to have you. If I know, Sammy, if you can tell me, I specifically have this period to this period open, and if you want to do your presentation live, I'll actually schedule you in when you're available. If you want to do that, just email me and let me know. I want to just let me know I want to do my presentation live. Could I do it during this slot? And then I'll schedule you in for that. So, good. And I think that's all I have. This is a good place to stop as we start to talk about spelling issues. And any other questions? Okay, we are done. I will see you all next week. Do email me if you have any questions, and we'll see you next week.